Welcome to Transform Cardio Considerations. Today we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about cardio. So first things first, we're going to build on what we discussed in Master Maintenance.
So why do cardio? First, cardio is a great way for us to increase VO2 max. And VO2 max is basically our ability to maximally uptake oxygen, and it is a predictor of longevity. We also do cardio in order to increase mitochondrial efficiency, improve insulin sensitivity, and carbohydrate, etc., fatty acid, etc., sensitivity, increase mitochondrial quantity, so density is what you'll hear in the research, improve heart rate variability. So this goes into the kind of parasympathetic nature of your body, and HRV is very sensitive to cardio adaptations. Improve blood flow, decrease visceral fats. The great thing about visceral fat is that when you start to do cardio, it seems to be the best way to help someone lose visceral fat, even if their total body weight doesn't go down. So you do see that benefit. And visceral fat is, quote unquote, the most dangerous fat. It's the fat that's underneath the muscle, and it's in between the organs, etc. Where subcutaneous fat is underneath the skin. And cardio is a really great way to improve sleep.
So last time we talked about the types of cardio, and these basically vary within a range depending on your heart rate. So I wanted to give some examples real quick as far as how to illustrate that. So when we're breaking down the zones, zone 1 ends approximately your 60% max heart rate. You are burning almost exclusively fat here. Now this is an exaggeration because you're always burning some portion of amino acids and carbs. Zone 2 is your first lactate threshold. Essentially, that's where you start producing lactate at a more than normal rate. When you're at rest, you shouldn't really be producing much lactate or lactic acid at all. Lactate threshold 2, LT2. Zone 3 is where you're producing more lactate, and you can sustain this for a shorter period of time. So LT2 is about 4 nanomoles per liter. You don't really need to worry about that. And then zone 4 and 5 is where we start to approach VO2 max, and that's maximal intensity. Essentially here, you start at the start, you're burning almost all fat, and it progressively gets more and more carbohydrate dominant. At the end here in zone 4 and 5, you are basically not using oxygen because it is so rapid, and you aren't able to sustain these periods, these intensities for very long. So zone 2, 3, and 4, you can sustain for a good amount of time. Zone 5, very little. Zone 1 and 2, almost indefinitely.
And really fast, zone 4 and especially zone 5. In these zones, you really relying on the phosphocreatine system as well. So this is why, a lot of people talk about supplementing creatine, but creatine is also in muscle meats, so in animal meat. And then we also synthesize a fair amount of creatine endogenously through methylation. So this is, again, why micronutrients continue to really matter for cardio as well.
I thought these were some really fun and useful charts that I found from Phil Batterson, and essentially illustrates the races that are performed in each zone. And obviously there's a huge amount of variability between person to person and just like the zones themselves and the races. But the longer you run, essentially, the more you're going to be in zone 1 and zone 2. The more shorter distance runs, or like mid distance, like half marathon, about 13 miles, is between zone 3 and 4, mostly zone 3. 10K and 5K, mostly in zone 4. And then the mile sprints, anything under that, is going to be zone 4, 5 plus. So there is some people talking about zone 6, like mostly anaerobic. And I thought that's just a good rule of thumb, that like the ultra and the zone 1, essentially you can be doing indefinitely. Walking generally would be in zone 1. And the zone 5, the more intensity, higher heart rate, you can be able to do for a very short amount of time. And this kind of picture on the right goes alongside with it. So at the peak of zone 2, you're burning as much fat as possible. Carbs continue to scale throughout it. The amount of fat you're burning tends to decrease throughout it because fat is not the most efficient fuel in terms of energy per minute.
Okay, so as you can see, it is important to do some zone 3 training. However, the reason why we primarily just use kind of zone 1, zone 2, and then zone 4, zone 5, so kind of the, slower, kind of longer, and then the more high intensity, is because we're specifically looking for those adaptations. But that doesn't mean that zone 3 is wrong, or you're wrong to do zone 3, especially if you want to, eventually train for one of these races and stuff. So again, we're just specifically using these zones to get the adaptation that we're looking for in Transform. But you can always tailor your training in the future to what you're looking to achieve.
So another way of thinking about the zones that's probably much more useful, because at the end of the day, the zones are all relative. They're kind of made up. They're just a useful framework to think of. There's no exact number for any of us. A useful way of thinking about it in that sense is just easy, medium, and hard. Easy would be zone 1 and 2. Hard would be zones 4 and 5. And medium would be, depending on the zones 3 and 4. So hard, and the reason we do all of these, especially we mostly do easy and hard, is because they have different adaptations that result from them. So increasing VO2 max and mitochondrial biogenesis. Increasing your VO2 max and mitochondrial biogenesis and more mitochondria is something we get largely from hard, closer to VO2 max training, very intense, very short. Medium, you do get a lot of the other adaptations as well, but not in as short of a dose. And this is mostly where you increase speed. So if you're training for a marathon, half marathon, mile, you'll also be spending a lot of times in zone 3 and 4. And then easy, building capacity, improving fat oxidation. So whether or not you're training for sprints, probably a little bit less than sprints, but mile, half marathon, 5K, you'll be spending a lot of time trying to do easy work with zone 2, zone 1, trying to build your capacity and improving your metabolic adaptations as well.
And again, so VO2 max is basically how efficient are your lungs, heart, cardiovascular system, so blood vessels, and your muscles able to use and extract not only oxygen, but also mobilize CO2 and rid the CO2 from the body. And improving your CO2 max is associated with lower risk of heart disease, stroke, hypertension, etc. So again, this is why the cardio part of Transform is so crucially important for our underlying health, because a lot of people think, oh, I just need a supplement, or I just need to worry about diet when it comes to, heart disease, stroke, hypertension. But really, your cardio ability, capacity, etc., is like way outperforms any improvements you would get from diet. So again, this is why it is crucially important to continue to train zone 2 and high intensity. And again, zone 3 too, if you want to, as you age. So if you're going to find your zone 2 using the calculation method, you basically find your max heart rate. And in order to do that, you take 220 minus your age. So that's your max, your theoretical max heart rate, because again, just because that's your theoretical, people can get their heart rate higher than that. So it's a theoretical heart rate. And then you times that by 60% or 0.6, and that kind of gives you your low end of the zone 2 range. And then to find your max end of the zone 2 range, you times your max theoretical heart rate by 69% or 0.69, and then it gives you the high end. But again, this is just a theoretical calculation. So, don't stress if you're like not exactly within this range.
Some other ways to do it are just nasal breathing, the talk test. It should feel pretty easy. You should be able to do this almost indefinitely, and you may need to walk intermittently. I have been training a lot in the heat, sadly, because it's summer, and I still need to walk a decent amount to keep myself in zone 2, because I don't want to do a 15-minute mile pace. That sounds horrible. I just can't go that slow. So I've just been walking intermittently when I can't get my heart rate down. So there's nothing wrong with this. And again, zone 2, all these things are kind of made up. So just focus on it feeling easy, and that you should be able to do it almost indefinitely. You shouldn't get to a point where you are going to bend over on your knees because you're so gassed you can't do it any longer. It should just be your joints, or you're just bored, that you're like, all right, I'm done with this. And hopefully, as we scale your capacity through Transform, you won't ever get to a point where your joints are like, I'm begging to be done. We're not running any ultra marathons. We're going to be doing around 30 minutes of zone 2 work.
So what is friction? We have something called static friction, and then we have kinetic friction. So static friction is literally if I'm standing still and I'm trying to move. And then kinetic friction is the friction of when I'm already moving. And what the kind of more general definition of friction, it's basically the force that resists your motion between two surfaces in contact. So for example, when you're running, the friction would be between your shoe and the ground. And again, it acts in the opposite direction of the direction of travel. So friction, like on an elliptical, would be just the like friction of the actual machine moving itself. Friction in water would obviously be, the drag of you trying to propel yourself through the water.
And so we all know with friction, like if you're sliding on an icy surface, you can go way further with a lot less effort. When it comes to zone 2 in the cardiovascular work, the modalities that have the less friction are going to require the most effort. And the modalities with the most friction will require the least effort. Here's what we mean here. Swimming I don't know if anyone could be in zone one swimming, maybe a professional swimmer, but like that you would just have to be so relaxed going at such a leisurely pace that it's just like kind of a walk in the park. The reason so many people struggle with running to stay in their zone two range is because there's so much friction. And on the other side, we have things like rebounding or ice skating or skiing. Also notice how like all the stick figures are normal, and I put that to cool skier because I'm biased and I like skiing or snowboarding. But so the more friction, or like even riding a bike, you're gonna have to work a lot more harder because there's gonna be a lot more muscular demand in order for you to get to the zone two pace. The same thing with zone five, like it's gonna take a lot more mechanical work. You're gonna be using a lot more muscular demand in order to get there. So the zone two running or swimming is going to feel like almost painfully slow. Whereas if you're trying to do zone two on a rebounder or ice skating or skiing, you're actually going to have to be working really hard, somewhat hard, to get into zone two because of the nature of those sports. And even if you think about this, like hiking uphill, you're going to have a lot more friction than hiking downhill. So you might be in zone two on the way up, or even past zone two on the way up, but you might be barely in zone two on the way down. So it's just useful to think about that. So when considering what different cardio modalities, we often get asked, is impact bad? And in the sense that like we shouldn't be running because it's hard on your knees, or it's hard on your ankles, it's hard on your feet. First of all, if you're doing anything for long enough, most people are going to suffer from some sort of injury. And that could be running, it could be throwing backflips off the Empire State Building, or it could be sewing. Like if you do it for long enough, the volume will get to your joints at some level if you do it frequently enough too. Second, like there is an amount of impact that is quote unquote bad for you that will cause you to get injured as a result of not having the runway, the time and energy and nutrients to create the adaptations that allow you to handle that. There also might just be an amount of impact that is, you will never be able to recover from. Like I don't think anyone ever feels good after a ultra marathon, but impact is essentially like your ability to handle impact, bones, knees, joints on the ground, is essentially going to be related to your strength of your tendons, the tissues around them, and your bones. So again, there is an amount that's too much, at least for you right now. But if Sally can only run 1 mile because her bones just disintegrate, she's going to be a less strong version of Sally than Sally that can run a half marathon. And she's like, okay, the next day, maybe she's a little banged up, a little sore, but that's because her bones and her tendons and all of her joints have adapted to be able to handle more impact. So they are stronger. So impact is not inherently bad. That's why we do plyometrics. Some of the reasons we do sprints as well. Some of the reasons we do lifting to increase the capacity of our joints, muscles, tendons, etc.
And like what Tyler spoke about during the friction slide, if you are finding that the impact is too much, just go choose one of the other ones on the lower friction one, like the rebounder, for example. Even swimming, even though swimming has a lot of friction with it, but it's the reason why swimming can be a lower impact is because it's mostly concentric, where a lot of people, you get the like muscle damage from the eccentric. So there's definitely many ways that you can, allow yourself to slowly build the aerobic capacity, but not, have the joint issues, etc.
And it is something to watch out for here. I ran in Maine a few weeks ago when I was visiting a friend, and Maine, did not know this, is insanely hilly. Denver, believe it or not, is really flat. And so I was running a lot faster on the downhill just because of the nature of the hilly downhills, and my joints were not ready for that. So on the second run, I made sure to slow down a lot more because I didn't want my joints to be so banged up the rest of the day and the following days. So even my capacity, which is somewhat high, in different environments I might be stretched beyond capacity. And one useful kind of tidbit to think about here is the one sport I probably would severely discourage my kids from playing is actually swimming, because there's no impact, and that's one of the most pivotal phases of life for developing bone density. So I would really want them to be at least playing other sports in addition to swimming. I hope they learn to swim. I would love them to learn to swim, and I'd probably let them surf because I'm biased and I think surfing is cool. But I think saying impact is bad is just completely, it's not. And you really want to be able to absorb and handle impact as we age, because that's going to relate to bone density and your performance and playing with your kids, doing all the things that we were able to do as a kid, as an adult.
And then back to, which modality can you do? It really depends on what fits best for you, your time, your equipment availability. We have a long list of equipment in the Everfit app itself. And then you can see examples on this slide, like jogging or hiking or Stairmaster, rebounding. And then the max exertion, anything again that gets your heart rate up, gets to the point where you have to open your mouth to breathe, you're winded, you can't, have uh, complete sentences, let alone say a word for a couple seconds or, minutes after actually doing the max exertion. So definitely, what you see on this slide and what you see in EverFit, you're not only beholden to those movements, whatever you can do in order to put yourself in zone two, and then also max exertion, please do that. And then also, you do not have to do the same modality for both. So you could do the rower for zone two and actual sprinting for max exertion, or vice versa, etc. So if you like to mix it up, that's great. If you want to keep with the same one, that's also great.
And again, if we have just persuaded you on impact, maybe you do like one sprint on outside on a hill or something to reduce the impact, and then you gradually progress in that. You do the rest swimming or rowing or something else as we build on that. The same thing for jogging, maybe only jog for 5 minutes at the first, and then you ruck or swim or something else for the rest of it for the zone two. And if you guys do have any other creative ways to do this that weren't covered in the alternatives we have listed, which is a pretty exhaustive list, please tell us and we'll add it to them. And up next, we're going to talk about diet design.